The dust stung my eyes as I stood on the side of that godforsaken road, the sun beating down like it had a personal vendetta. My daughter's funeral was yesterday, and the weight of her absence sat heavier than the heat. Clara, my only child, was gone at 38, taken by a disease that didn't care about her laughter or the way she could light up a room. I was still drowning in that loss when my son-in-law, Greg, decided to show me just how low a man could sink. Greg had always been a charmer, the kind of man who could sell you a dream and make you believe it was yours. Clara loved him fiercely, and for her sake, I tried to see the good in him. But after she died, the mask slipped. He was cold at the funeral, his eyes darting to his phone more than to the coffin. I thought it was grief at first. Everyone processes pain differently, but something about his impatience, the way he avoided my gaze, set my nerves on edge. That morning, he'd offered to drive me home from the church. I was too broken to question it. My house was a 2-hour drive through the Nevada desert, a stretch of nothing but sand and sky. I leaned my head against the window, clutching Clara's locket, her tiny baby photo tucked inside. The hum of the engine was the only sound until Greg spoke, his voice sharp enough to cut through my fog. You know, Martha, Clara's gone. No point dragging this out. He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the wheel. I frowned, my heart lurching. What are you talking about? He sighed, like I was a child who didn't get it. You're old. You're alone. I'm not running a charity here. Clara's life insurance is mine, and I'm not splitting it with you. The words hit like a slap. Clara's life insurance money she'd set aside for emergencies, for her future. For me, if I needed, it was the last thing on my mind. But Greg, he'd been counting dollars while I was counting memories. Greg, you can't, I started. But he cut me off. I can. And I will. You're not my responsibility. He pulled the car over, the tires crunching on gravel. We were nowhere miles from anything resembling civilization. He leaned across me, opened the passenger door, and jerked his head. Get out. I stared at him, my mouth dry. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? His eyes were cold, empty. Get out. Martha. I'm done. I was 70 years old. My knees ached from arthritis, and my heart was shattered from burying my daughter. But I wasn't helpless. I stepped out, the desert wind whipping my dress. And before I could say another word, he slammed the door and peeled away, leaving me in a cloud of dust. I stood there, the locket warm in my hand, and felt something shift inside me. Grief was still there, heavy as ever, but now it was joined by something sharp-rich. Greg thought he could discard me like trash, take everything Clara left behind, and walk away clean. He was wrong. I started walking. The road stretched endlessly, but I'd lived long enough to know that survival wasn't about strength, it was about stubbornness. I'd raised Clara alone after her father died, worked double shifts as a nurse, and faced down worse odds than a desert road. Greg didn't know who he was dealing with. The sun climbed higher, and my throat burned with thirst. My shoes weren't made for this, and each step sent a jolt through my knees. But I kept moving, one foot in front of the other, Clara's locket swinging against my chest. I thought of her smile, her strength, and how she'd never let a man like Greg break her. I wouldn't either. After what felt like hours, I saw a speck in the Distancia gas station, shimmering like a mirage. My legs trembled, but I pushed on, driven by the fire in my chest. When I finally stumbled through the door, the clerk, a young man with a bored expression, looked up from his phone. You okay? Ma'am, he asked, eyebrows raised. I managed a nod, catching my breath. Need a phone. And water. He slid a bottle across the counter and pointed to an old payphone in the corner. I didn't have much cash, but I had enough for a call. My fingers shook as I dialed Sarah, my oldest friend, a woman who'd known me since we were girls stealing apples from the neighbor's tree. Martha. Her voice crackled through the line, sharp with worry. Where are you? I've been calling. No time, I said, my voice hoarse. Greg stranded me. Desert Road. Mile marker 47. I need you. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'm coming. Stay put. I hung up, drank the water in slow sips, and let my mind work. Greg thought he'd won, but he didn't know I'd spent years as a nurse, watching people, learning their tells. I knew he was greedy, and greed makes men sloppy. He'd made a mistake leaving me alive. Sarah arrived in under an hour, her old pickup kicking up dust. She was a wiry woman, her gray hair pulled back, her eyes blazing with the kind of loyalty that doesn't fade with age. She hugged me fierce, then pulled back to look at me. What the hell happened? She demanded. I told her everything, Greg's words. The life insurance. The way he'd left me to die. Her face hardened, and she swore under her breath. He's not getting away with this, she said. What's the plan? I didn't have one yet, but I knew one thing. Greg had underestimated me. I wasn't just Clara's mother, I was a woman who'd survived too much to be broken by a coward like him. We're going to make him regret it, I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. Fast. Sarah's pickup rattled as we drove back toward town, the desert blurring past us. My hands gripped Clara's locket, its weight grounding me as my mind raced. Greg thought he could erase me, take Clara's legacy, and move on like nothing happened. But I'd spent a lifetime fighting for my daughter, and I wasn't about to let her memory be tarnished by his greed. We need to know what he's planning, I said, my voice low. He mentioned the life insurance, but there's more to it. I can feel it. Sarah glanced at me, her eyes sharp. You think he's been scheming this whole time? I know he has. I remembered the way Greg had hovered over Clara's hospital bed in her final days, asking about paperwork, her will, her accounts. At the time, I thought he was just being practical. Now, I saw it for what it was: calculation. We pulled into my driveway, the little house I'd shared with Clara for years. It felt empty without her, but I didn't have time to dwell. Sarah followed me inside, and we sat at the kitchen table, a pot of coffee brewing to keep us sharp. I pulled out Clara's old laptop, the one she'd used for work. If Greg was after her money, he'd likely left a trail. Clara was meticulous, I said, powering it up. If there's anything to find, it's here. The password was her birthday, a detail Greg never cared to learn. I navigated to her email, my heart aching at the sight of her name in the inbox. There were messages from her lawyer, dated weeks before her death. My hands trembled as I opened them. Clara had updated her will, naming me as the primary beneficiary of her life insurance, with a small portion for Greg to cover immediate expenses. She'd also set up a trust for her future children she'd never have. Greg knew. I whispered. He knew she left most of it to me. Sarah leaned over, scanning the screen. Then why's he acting like it's all his? Because he's planning to contest it, I said, my voice hardening. Or worse. I kept digging, finding bank statements and insurance documents. Clara's policy was worth $500. 000. A fortune for a man like Greg, who'd always resented her success. But there was something else: a recent email from an unfamiliar address. Sent to Greg. The subject line read, "Transfer confirmation." I opened it, my stomach twisting. It was a message from an offshore bank, confirming a request to transfer funds from Clara's account. The date was 2 days after her death. Greg had been moving money before her body was even cold. That bastard, Sarah hissed. He's stealing it. Not yet, I said. The transfer's pending. We have time. Sarah cracked her knuckles, a habit from her days as a mechanic. What's the move, Martha? I leaned back, my mind spinning. Greg wasn't just greedy, he was reckless. He'd stranded me to send a message, to scare me into staying quiet. But fear wasn't my style. I'd spent years as a nurse, staying calm under pressure, thinking 3 steps ahead. This was no different. We hit him where it hurts, I said. His wallet, his reputation, everything. Sarah grinned, a spark of mischief in her eyes. You're talking my language. But we need help. I nodded. Call Tommy. Tommy was Sarah's nephew, a private investigator with a knack for digging up dirt. He'd helped us years ago when Clara's ex tried to dodge child support. If anyone could find leverage on Greg, it was him. Sarah made the call, and within an hour, Tommy was at my door. A lanky man in his 40s with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. He hugged me, his face softening. I'm sorry about Clara. Martha, what's going on? I laid it all out: Greg's betrayal, the desert, the money. Tommy's jaw tightened as he listened, his fingers already tapping at his keyboard. Guys like Greg always leave a trail, he said. Give me a few hours. While Tommy worked, Sarah and I brainstormed. Greg wasn't just after the insurance, he was building a new life, one where Clara and I didn't exist. I remembered the way he'd been at the funeral, distracted, checking his phone. He was already moving on, maybe with someone else. The thought made my blood boil, but it also gave me an idea. Tommy, I called. Check his social media. Look for new contacts, especially women. Tommy nodded, his fingers flying. By nightfall, he had a lead. Greg's been messaging a woman named Vanessa, he said, turning his laptop to show us. She's a real estate agent in Vegas. Looks like they've been cozy for months. The betrayal stung, but it wasn't surprising. Greg had always been a snake, and Clara's illness had only exposed it. What else? I asked. He's been transferring money to a joint account with her, Tommy said. Small amounts, but it adds up. And there's a paper trail: texts, emails, even a lease agreement for a condo in her name. I felt a spark of hope. This was the leverage we needed. Greg wasn't just stealing from me. He was breaking laws, betraying Clara's memory. I wasn't going to let him walk away clean. We need to move fast, I said, before he finalizes that transfer. Tommy grinned. I've got a friend at the bank. Let's see what we can freeze. As he made calls, I looked at Sarah, her face lit with the same fire I felt. Greg had tried to break me, but he'd only woken something stronger. Clara's memory deserved better, and I was going to make sure he paid. The next morning, the air in my kitchen felt electric. Tommy had worked through the night, and his friend at the bank confirmed the transfer was still pending. Greg hadn't finalized it yet. We had a window, but it was narrow. Sarah poured coffee, her hands steady despite the tension. I clutched Clara's locket. Its familiar weight a reminder of why we were doing this. "Greg's meeting Vanessa today?" Tommy said, scrolling through his laptop. I hacked into his calendar. Lunch at a fancy place in Vegas. Probably to celebrate his new start. I snorted. He's celebrating while I'm picking up the pieces. Sarah slammed her mug down. Let's crash his party. The idea was tempting, but I shook my head. Not yet. We need to be smarter than him. If we confront him now, he'll cover his tracks. Tommy nodded. Martha's right. We've got evidence emails. Texts. The least, but it's not enough to nail him legally. We need to catch him in the act. I leaned forward, my mind sharpening. What if we set him up? Get him to admit what he's doing in record. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You mean a sting? Exactly. I'd seen enough crime shows with Clara to know the basics. Greg was cocky. And cocky men talk when they think they're safe. We need to lure him somewhere private. Get him talking about the money. The desert. All of it. Tommy rubbed his chin. I can pose as a lawyer. Say I'm handling Clara's estate. Tell him there's a problem with the insurance payout. Get him to meet me. I liked it. Greg's greed would draw him in like a moth to a flame. Do it, I said. But we need to record everything. Tommy grinned. I've got equipment for that. Hidden mics. The works. We spent the morning planning. Tommy would call Greg, pretending to be a lawyer named James Carter, claiming there was a discrepancy in Clara's will that needed immediate discussion. The meeting would be at a quiet diner on the edge of town, wired with Tommy's gear. Sarah and I would be nearby, listening in, ready to step in if things went south. By noon, Tommy made the call. I watched his face, holding my breath as he slipped into character. His voice smooth and professional. Greg took the bait, agreeing to meet that evening. I could almost hear the greed in his voice through the phone. He's hooked, Tommy said, hanging up. Now we wait. The diner was a faded relic, its neon sign flickering in the dusk. Sarah and I sat in her pickup across the street, a receiver in my lap feeding us audio from Tommy's mic. Greg arrived first, strutting in like he owned the place. I clenched my fists, remembering the desert, the way he'd left me to die. Tommy walked in a minute later, dressed in a cheap suit that screamed small-time lawyer. He shook Greg's hand, his voice calm as he started the script we'd rehearsed. Thanks for meeting me, Mr. Lawson, Tommy said. There's an issue with Clara's life insurance. The beneficiary designation is unclear. Greg's voice crackled through the receiver, sharp and impatient. Unclear. It's mine. She was my wife. Legally, it's not that simple, Tommy said. Martha's name is on the policy. There's a trust involved, too. Were you aware of that? There was a pause, and I could imagine Greg's face read. Calculating. Martha's out of the picture, he said finally. She's old. Confused. She won't fight this. My blood boiled, but I stayed quiet, letting Tommy work. Out of the picture. Tommy pressed. What do you mean? Greg laughed. A cold, ugly sound. Let's just say she's not a problem anymore. I made sure of that. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. He's admitting it, she whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding. He was digging his own grave, and I was happy to hand him the shovel. Tommy leaned in, his voice low. You're saying you Handled, Martha. That's a bold move. Greg's voice dropped. Conspiratorial. Look. She's an old lady. Nobody's gonna care if she disappears. I dropped her in the desert. She won't last long. I felt a chill. Not from fear, but from the clarity of his betrayal. He'd planned this. Thought it through. But he hadn't counted on me surviving. Or on having friends like Sarah and Tommy. Tommy kept him talking, steering the conversation to the money. Greg admitted to the offshore account, the transfers, even his plans with Vanessa. Every word was recorded, a noose tightening around his neck. When the meeting ended, Greg left the diner, oblivious to the storm coming his way. Tommy slipped out, joining us in the truck. Got it all, he said, holding up a USB drive. Audio's clean. Sarah grinned. Time to take him down. I shook my head. Not yet. We've got him on tape. But we need to make sure he feels it. Let's hit him where it hurts most, his future. The USB drive in my hand felt like a loaded gun. Greg's confession, his smug admission of leaving me in the desert, stealing Claire's money, and planning his new life with Vanessa was all there. Clear as day. But I wasn't ready to turn it over to the police just yet. Justice wasn't enough. I wanted Greg to feel the weight of his choices, to see his world crumble before the law even touched him. Sarah, Tommy, and I huddled in my living room, the glow of Clara's laptop casting shadows on the walls. We've got him on fraud and attempted murder, Tommy said, leaning back in his chair. The recording's solid. But you're right. Martha going straight to the cops feels too easy. Sarah's eyes gleamed. What's the play? You want to scare him first. I nodded, my mind racing. Greg's all about image. He thinks he's untouchable. This big shot with a new woman and a new life. We take that away, first his money, his girlfriend, his pride. Then we let the law finish him. Tommy grinned. I like it. Let's start with Vanessa. We dug deeper into Vanessa's life. Tommy's skills pulled up her social media, her business dealings, even her client list. She was ambitious, flashy, the kind of woman who loved the spotlight. But she wasn't stupid. If she knew Greg was a fraud, she'd drop him faster than a hot coal. We need to get to her, I said. Show her who Greg really is. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You think she'll believe us? She'll believe proof, I said. We send her the recording anonymously. Let her hear Greg talking about the money, the desert. She'll see he's using her. Tommy nodded. I can make it untraceable. Burner email. Encrypted file. She'll think it came from a whistleblower. We spent the next hour crafting the message. Tommy edited the recording to highlight Greg's worst moments, his callous words about me, his plans to siphon Claire's money. The email was simple. You deserve to know who you're dealing with. We attached the file and sent it to Vanessa's business email. Then waited. The response came faster than we expected. Tommy had set up a dummy account to monitor replies. And within 2 hours, Vanessa's name popped up. Her message was short. Furious. Who sent this? Is this real? She's rattled, Sarah said, reading over my shoulder. What now? We don't reply, I said. Let her stew. She'll confront Greg, and he'll slip up. Sure enough, Tommy's phone pinged with an alert. He'd tapped into Greg's messages, a gray area legally. But we weren't playing by Greg's rules anymore. Vanessa had texted him, we need to talk. Now. Greg's reply was defensive. What's this about? I'm busy. She's not buying it, Tommy said, showing us the thread. Vanessa was demanding a meeting, her texts laced with suspicion. Greg was scrambling, promising to explain everything in person. Let's make sure that meeting happens, I said. Tommy, can you track them? He nodded. Got their phones pinged. They're meeting at her condo tonight. Sarah clapped her hands. Road trip. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to storm in, confront Greg myself, see the fear in his eyes. But that was reckless, and I'd learned long ago that revenge is best served cold. We stay close, but we don't show our faces. Not yet. That night, we parked a block from Vanessa's condo, a sleek building in Vegas's glitzy heart. Tommy had rigged a long-range mic, letting us eavesdrop from the truck. The audio crackled, then cleared as Vanessa's voice came through, sharp and angry. You lied to me, Greg. She snapped. You said the money was yours. Who's this old lady you handled? Greg's voice was smooth, but I could hear the edge of panic. Baby, it's not what you think. Martha's crazy, making things up. Don't lie. Vanessa cut him off. I heard the recording. You left her in the desert. Are you insane? I smiled, a bitter twist of my lips. Greg was floundering, his charm failing him. Vanessa wasn't just angry, she was done. The argument escalated, her voice rising until she screamed. Get out. We're through. Greg tried to salvage it, but the door slammed, and the mic picked up his muttered curses as he stormed off. Sarah laughed softly. One down. Not enough, I said. He's still got the money. Tommy turned to me. The bank transfer's still pending. My contact says we can flag it as fraud, but we need to move now. Do it, I said, and send the recording to the police. Anonymously. Tommy's fingers flew across his keyboard, setting the wheels in motion. By morning, Greg's offshore account would be frozen, his dreams of a new life slipping away. But I wasn't done. I wanted him to know it was me. The next day, I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a text, something tangible, something he'd feel in his hands. I kept it short, my words cold and precise. Greg, you thought you could bury me in the desert. You were wrong. Clara's memory lives, and so do I. You'll pay for what you did. I mailed it to his office, knowing he'd read it and sweat. Let him wonder how I'd survived, how I'd outsmarted him. Let him feel the walls closing in. The letter was a spark, but the fire was coming. Tommy's contact at the bank confirmed the transfer was frozen, flagged as suspicious. Greg's offshore account was locked, and the police had the recording, thanks to Tommy's anonymous tip. But I wasn't naive. Greg was slippery, and men like him don't go down without a fight. I needed to stay one step ahead. Sarah and I spent the morning at her house, going over the plan. Tommy was still tracking Greg's movements, his phone pinging at a motel on the edge of Vegas. He's laying low, Tommy said, joining us with a fresh pot of coffee. Probably knows the money's stuck. Good, I said. Let him panic. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. What's next? You want to face him? I considered it, picturing Greg's smug face twisting when he saw me alive. Unstoppable. But confrontation wasn't enough. I wanted him to lose everything: his freedom, his future, his sense of control. Not yet, I said. We need to make sure the police have enough to arrest him. Tommy nodded. The recording's strong, but we need more. If we can prove he intended to harm you. It's not just fraud, it's attempted murder. The words hit hard. Attempted murder. Greg hadn't just wanted me gone. He'd wanted me dead. The desert wasn't a random choice, it was a grave he'd picked out. But I'd walked out. And now I was the one holding the cards. We need physical evidence, I said. Something from the car? Maybe. He drove me out there. There's got to be something. Tommy's eyes lit up. His car. If we can get to it, I can check for traces, your DNA, your fingerprints. Proof you were there. Sarah grinned. I know a guy who can get us into that motel parking lot. No questions asked. I raised an eyebrow. You know a lot of guys. Sarah. She laughed. A sound that cut through the tension. Comes with the territory. Let's move. By afternoon, we were parked near the motel. A rundown place with peeling paint and a flickering sign. Greg's car, a shiny black SUV he'd bought with Clara's money, was in the lot. Sarah's contact. A grizzled tow truck driver named Mike. Met us there. He didn't ask why we needed access. Just popped the lock with a Slim Jim and stepped back. Tommy went to work, swabbing the passenger seat, the door handle, anywhere I might have left a trace. I watched from the truck, my heart pounding. If this worked, we'd have undeniable proof tying Greg to the desert. Got it, Tommy said, holding up a bag of samples. Your DNA's all over this. Combined with the recording. It's a slam dunk. Sarah clapped him on the back. You're a genius, kid. But I wasn't celebrating yet. Greg was still out there, and I knew he'd fight dirty. We need to get this to the police, I said. But I want to see his face when they take him. Tommy hesitated. That's risky, Martha. He's desperate now. I know, I said. But Clara deserves this. I deserve this. We drove to the police station, Tommy's evidence and the recording in hand. The detective, a no-nonsense woman named Alvarez, listened as we laid out the story, leaving out the shadier parts of Tommy's methods. She played the recording, her face hardening as Greg's voice filled the room. This is enough for a warrant, she said. We'll bring him in. Can I be there? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Alvarez studied me, then nodded. Stay out of sight. We don't want him spooked. That evening, we followed the police to the motel. Sarah and I stayed in the truck, parked across the street, as Alvarez and her team approached Greg's room. My heart raced as they knocked, then kicked the door in when he didn't answer. Greg's shouts echoed as they dragged him out, his hands cuffed, his face pale with shock. And then he saw me. I stepped out of the truck, standing under the motel's flickering lights. Our eyes locked, and I saw the moment he realized he'd lost. His mouth opened, but no words came. I didn't need them. My presence, alive and unbroken, said enough. Sarah squeezed my hand. You did it, Martha. Not yet, I said, watching as they loaded Greg into a police car. But we're close. Back at the station, Alvarez filled us in. The evidence was airtight, me DNA in the car, the recording, the frozen bank transfer. Greg was facing charges of fraud, theft, and attempted murder. He'd spend years behind bars, his dreams of a new life shattered. But as I walked out into the night, Clara's locket warm against my chest, I felt no joy. Justice was coming, but it wouldn't bring her back. All I could do was keep fighting, keep living. For her. The days after Greg's arrest blurred together. a mix of relief and lingering pain. The police had everything they needed, and the case was moving forward. The courthouse was a cold, gray building, and as I sat in the back of the courtroom a week later, watching Greg's arraignment, I felt no satisfaction. He stood there, his charm gone, his eyes hollow. The charges were read fraud, theft, attempted murder, and his bail was set high enough that he'd stay locked up. Vanessa was there, her face a mask of disgust as she avoided his gaze. The life he'd planned was gone, just like he'd tried to make me gone. Sarah sat beside me, her hand on mine. "You okay?" she whispered. I nodded, but my eyes were on Clara's locket, now hanging around my neck. "It's not enough," I murmured, "but it's something." Afterward, we drove back to my house in silence. The desert stretched out around us, vast and unforgiving, but I no longer felt its weight. I'd survived it, just as I'd survived Greg's betrayal. Sarah made tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Clara and I had shared countless meals. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. I traced the locket's edges, thinking of Clara's smile. "I live," I said, "for her." Tommy stopped by later, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "The insurance company's releasing the funds," he said. "It's all yours, Martha." I nodded, unsurprised. Clara had made sure of it. The money would help, but it wasn't about wealth, it was about her legacy, her love. "Donate half to the hospital," I said, "for cancer research." Clara would have wanted that. Tommy smiled. "You're one hell of a woman, Martha." I shrugged, but his words warmed me. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The desert had tested me, and Greg had underestimated me. But I was still here, still fighting. And as I looked out at the horizon, the sun sinking low, I felt Clara's presence, urging me on. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered, clutching the locket. For the first time in days, I smiled. The next morning, Sarah and I visited Clara's grave. I laid flowers down, my fingers brushing the headstone. "I got him, sweetheart," I said softly. "He won't hurt anyone else." The wind carried my words across the desert, and for a moment, I swore I felt her near. I stood, my knees aching but my heart steady, and walked back to the truck with Sarah. Life wasn't done with me, and I wasn't done with it. Greg's trial would come, and I'd be there, a silent force in the courtroom, a mother's love turned to steel. He'd regret the day he crossed me, and Clara's memory would live on, stronger than ever.